Why is it that some people who, and I'm just going to pick one out of thin air, not really, David Petraeus, former four-star general, who to this day still has a reputation for being a hero in Iraq, and he had all the inputs ready to save us in Afghanistan too, but only them politicians sabotaged that and moved it out. Then he became the CIA director, et cetera. Why is that guy still listened to? Because here's what he said on the eve of the launching of this offensive operation.
I believe that we'll see for the first time in this war on either side the achievement of true combined arms effects. In other words, the results of tanks protected by infantry against anti-tank guided missiles, artillery and mortars keeping the enemy's heads down, engineers reducing the obstacles, breaching these fortifications that the Russians have established, air defense keeping the Russians off the Ukrainians, electronic warfare jamming the Russians' already inadequate command and control facilities, and all orchestrated by very, very good Ukrainian command and control, and also using drones out over the Russians to attack them in depth with the precision munitions that the U.S. and U.K. and others have provided. And this, I think, is going to break the front lines. And noting that on the Russian side, this is a force that has been battered, that many of these units have been in constant combat for well over a year. They're not pulling units offline and reconstituting them. In other words, replacing the losses, the people, the equipment, and retraining them. They're just adding people to the front lines. That's not the way you produce a cohesive, coherent, well-disciplined organization. And I think, therefore, that's why they're going to crack, crumble, and perhaps actually collapse.
Now, that's a lot longer of a clip than I normally show, but I did that on purpose because I wanted to really reinforce here something. You had David Petraeus on the eve of this offensive operation tell that BBC reporter in detail why the Ukraine side would succeed and why the Russian side would fail. And he was nearly wrong about everything. And it's not like after the fact you can, Monday morning quarterback it and say, well, he was wrong and he was dumb. I wrote almost 2 months before that statement was made that this offensive had almost no chance of success. And I said, even if it had some outlying tactical success, it would still be a strategic failure no matter what, but that it probably would even fail to accomplish that. And I was very specific in my own article about why that is. And it turned out because what I just said, the Ukraine side had virtually no air force. They had no air cover. We would never have attempted such an operation without air superiority, if not air supremacy. They didn't have the engineering support. They didn't have enough armor. They had some, but they didn't have enough. And most critically, more critically than all of that, they didn't have the trained manpower, because that stuff can't be created in 2 or 3 months of training like they tried to do. You need years, multiple years of building a force, training with it, growing the different leaders at the different echelons of company, battalion, brigade, the strategic level, at division level or so. You have to have people at each of these levels in the way that they were organized to fight there in this combined arms situation. And the arms have to be coordinated to work together. They have to have the field training exercises and then studied and gone to classroom stuff even on. You got to do all that to have a shot at defeating a dug-in enemy outward. That is the most difficult path, the offensive that you can do, is to unseat a dug-in enemy. We asked them to do the most difficult thing that they could do when they had almost none of the advantages necessary to have a shot. So the question has to be asked. Why did David Petraeus not know that? And then on the Russian side, he said the same thing. He listed this whole reason why that they weren't succeeding and why they had bad leadership and all this. These were myths. These were marketing kinds of deals. We wanted the Russians to look bad, so we just said they were bad. Well, the truth is they were already making a lot of improvements, especially since General Surovikin had arrived on the scene. He took some hard operational decisions, like he gave up the city of Kherson without a fight because he said it would be more expensive to hold it than to give it. It was a huge PR and media celebration for the Ukraine side. The West cheered and celebrated. The Russians took their licks. They went back about their business, but they started making fundamental changes. And instead of recognizing that they were doing that, instead they just, like Petraeus, would just mock them and say they can't do it, making up failures that didn't actually exist. Well, that works for media. It definitely worked on, I think it was May 31st of 2023. Everybody believed him. But see, so few people actually go back and look at what happened and said, hey, hang on. You said they were going to succeed here, and it was an abysmal failure. It didn't just fail. It's not like two teams were evenly pitted and, well, one eventually won the other day because things just didn't go their way. This was like an obliteration, a destruction from day one. That the Ukraine side suffered these losses, which were entirely predictable. How come these guys didn't know that? So now then you see, we're built in a case here. You have the president of the United States, Joe Biden, who has said we're going to stay as long as it takes. And we're going to provide, and Ukraine is going to win, Russia is going to lose. Declarative statements. Yet the Secretary of State lay out this strategy. We're going to give a bunch of stuff to Ukraine, and we're going to put a lot of pressure, massive pressure is the word he used, on the Russian side. You had the Secretary of Defense say, yes, and we're going to give all this stuff, and we're going to assemble all these nations that are going to work together, and we're going to have this Normandy format, they called it, and just keep giving all this stuff, and we want to weaken. Our objective is to weaken Russia. Then you have some of our generals that are saying, yep, they're on the right path, the Ukraine side is, and they're going to definitely beat the Russian side, so much so, he said that they may crumble and collapse. The Russian defense could collapse, and the Ukraine could have gone all the way to the Sea of Azov. People still kept listening. They still keep putting microphones in his face. I just kind of want to wrap a bow around this because just last month, the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, okay, optimism is one thing. I get it. But now then you have the truth of it. President Trump was elected, promised to end the war. Everything he's doing is getting set up. All the things that he's saying, he's still going to do it. He's going to have a negotiated settlement to end the war. So you would think that your valedictory speech, your graduation speech that you're going to say just before you leave the stage, and this turned out to be about 10 or 11 days before he left office, you had the Secretary of Defense one more time repeat fiction.
So this coalition has become the arsenal of Ukrainian democracy. It has become an engine of global security. And this contact group has become the most consequential global coalition in more than 30 years.
The most consequential global coalition in 30 years. The arsenal of democracy for Ukraine. That it succeeded. I'm running out of superlatives to use of what planet is this guy from, delusion, all those kind of things. None of those seem fitting anymore. How can you say this with all these cameras rolling, recording it for posterity? You still want to say that, wow, we did great stuff. 1 million Ukraine potentially is dead. This laughable figure of 43,000, that was announced by Ukraine earlier today is embarrassingly, it's not even laughable. It's so grotesque and so dishonoring to the Ukrainian men who have actually given their lives. It's probably close to 1 million people, could be a little bit more. It could be 1.5, 2 million wounded on top of that. Scores of thousands have lost limbs and will be maimed for the rest of their lives. PTSD, nobody has a clue what that is, but it's got to be astronomical. And it's something that the Ukraine country is going to be dealing with for a generation. For 50, 60 years into the future until these guys die off. It's going to be affecting a lot of people for a long time. No concept of that. No recognition that our policies produced this.